The blue sun of Kalara cast long shadows across the dying world. Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold observation window of Station Alpha 9, watching the final moments of an entire civilization. Below him, the planet that had been home to 12 billion souls now burned under the relentless assault of the Zephyrian warfleet. Jake had seen many battles during his time as a human military observer with the Galactic Coalition, but nothing like this. The Zephyrians didn't just defeat their enemies, they crushed them so completely that resistance became impossible. Their massive ships, each one the size of a small city, hung in space like dark angels of death. Another defense platform just went dark, reported Lieutenant Kim Walsh, Jake's communications officer. Her voice shook as she spoke. Even though they were safe on the neutral observation station, the sight of such destruction affected everyone who witnessed it. Jake nodded grimly. The Kalari had been proud warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their fierce independence and strong military traditions. Their orbital defense platforms were considered some of the best in this sector of space, yet the Zephyrians had torn through them like paper. The enemy fleet moved with perfect coordination. Every ship knew exactly where to go and what to do. Their plasma cannons fired in sequence, each blast timed to create maximum damage. But it wasn't just their weapons that made them so effective. It was their special neural disruptors. Jake watched as another Kalari warship tried to mount a counterattack. The sleek blue vessel charged toward the nearest Zephyrian cruiser, its weapons blazing. For a moment, it looked like the Kalari might score a hit. Then the neural disruptor beam struck. The effect was immediate and terrible. The Kalari ship began to drift aimlessly as its crew fell victim to waves of panic and confusion. Jake had read about neural disruptors in classified reports, but seeing one in action was different. The weapon didn't destroy the ship. It destroyed the will to fight. "My God," whispered Dr. Alan Cross, the station's chief scientist. "Look at the crew readings from that ship. Their brain patterns are going crazy. They don't even know where they are anymore." Jake made another note in his report. The Zephyrians had perfected psychological warfare in ways that other species couldn't even imagine. They didn't need to kill every enemy soldier. They just needed to break their minds. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted only 3 hours. By the end, the once mighty Kalari fleet floated dead in space. Some ships were destroyed, but most had simply surrendered after their crews became too confused and frightened to fight. War Commander Vextal appeared on the main communication channel, his reptilian features cold and emotionless. The Zephyrian leader stood nearly 8 feet tall with gray-green skin and eyes that seemed to look right through whoever he was addressing. "People of Kalara," his voice echoed across all frequencies. "Your resistance is over. You have seen what happens to those who oppose the Zephyrian Empire. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Continue to resist and we will make your suffering last for generations." Jake had heard similar speeches from Vexatal before. The war commander had given the same ultimatum to 17 different worlds over the past 5 years. 17 worlds that no longer existed as free civilizations. On the surface of Kalara, the blue-skinned inhabitants gathered in their great cities, waiting for the inevitable. Their leaders had already sent word that they would surrender unconditionally. There was no point in fighting an enemy that could turn their own minds against them. "This is insane," muttered Captain Pete Collins, the station commander. "How did they get so powerful so fast? 10 years ago, nobody had even heard of the Zephyrian Empire. Now they control 3 entire sectors." Jake knew the answer, though it didn't make him feel any better. The Zephyrians had done something that no other species in galactic history had managed. They had created the perfect war machine. Their technology was advanced, their tactics were flawless, and their psychological weapons made traditional resistance impossible. But what worried Jake most was how quickly they adapted. During the battle, he had watched Zephyrian ships change, their attack patterns in real time, learning from every move the Kalari made. By the time the defenders tried a new strategy, the enemy had already figured out how to counter it. "Sir," Lieutenant Walsh called out, "we're receiving a priority message from Earth." Jake took the communication pad and read the message from Admiral Frank Carter at Terran Defense Command. The words made his blood run cold. Zephyrian fleet movements suggest human space is their next target. Return to Earth immediately for briefing. For years, humanity had stayed out of galactic politics. While other species formed the Galactic Coalition for Mutual Defense, humans had chosen to remain neutral. They focused on exploration, trade, and scientific research rather than military expansion. Most galactic leaders thought humans were too peaceful to be a real threat to anyone. Jake wasn't so sure about that assessment, but he knew one thing for certain. Humanity had never faced an enemy like the Zephyrians. Their small defense fleet consisted mainly of patrol ships and cargo haulers converted for military use. Against the massive war machines that had just destroyed Kalara, human ships would last about as long as soap bubbles in a hurricane. As Jake packed his belongings, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. The Zephyrians weren't just conquerors. They were artists of destruction. They had turned warfare into a precise science, and they seemed to enjoy their work. The worst part was their complete confidence. Vextal never showed doubt or hesitation. To him, victory wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. Every species they had encountered had the same weaknesses: fear, confusion, and the inability to think clearly under pressure. Jake wondered if humans would be any different. He had grown up hearing stories about human determination and creativity, but those were just stories. Against neural disruptors and overwhelming firepower, would human courage matter at all? As his shuttle prepared to depart for Earth, Jake took one last look at Kalara. The planet was still burning, but the fires were smaller now. Soon the Zephyrians would begin the process of turning another free world into another conquered territory. Jake opened his final report and began typing. The Zephyrian Empire represents the greatest threat to galactic freedom in recorded history. Their combination of advanced technology, superior tactics, and psychological warfare makes them virtually unstoppable. Recommend immediate preparation of Earth's defenses, though prospects for successful resistance appear minimal. He paused, before adding the last line. Humanity's isolation may have protected us until now, but our time of peace is ending. The storm is coming, and we are not ready. Captain Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the patrol vessel Pioneer, staring at the long-range sensor readings that had just changed her life forever. The small ship hummed quietly around her as it drifted through the outer edges of the New Dakota system, one of humanity's most peaceful agricultural colonies. Ma'am, I'm reading 17 large contacts moving toward our position, reported communications specialist Ryan Clark, his young face pale with worry. They're massive. Each one is at least 10 times bigger than our ship. Lisa felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her voice calm and steady. How long until they reach us? At current speed, about 2 hours, answered engineer Pete Sullivan from his station near the back of the small bridge. Pete had been with Lisa for 3 years, and she had never seen him look so nervous. Weapons Officer Amy Rodriguez checked her displays and shook her head. Captain, our sensors are having trouble getting clear readings on their technology. Whatever they're using, it's more advanced than anything in our databases. Lisa nodded and activated the ship's communication array. This is Captain Lisa Hayes, of the Terran vessel Pioneer. We are a peaceful exploration and patrol ship representing humanity. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions in human space. The response came faster than expected, and it chilled everyone on the bridge. The voice was cold, mechanical, and filled with contempt. Primitive humans, you will surrender immediately and prepare for occupation. Resistance is futile. You're pathetic. Species will join the Zephyrian Empire or be destroyed. You have 1 hour to decide. Lisa looked around at her crew. They were good people. Ryan was fresh out of the academy. Pete had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth. And Amy had joined the service to see the galaxy in peace. None of them had signed up for this. Send a message to Earth and all human colonies, Lisa ordered. Tell them we have made contact with a hostile alien force calling themselves the Zephyrian Empire. Include all sensor data and prepare for immediate transmission. As Ryan worked at his console, Lisa opened a channel back to the alien fleet. This is Captain Hayes. We are willing to discuss terms peacefully. Humanity has always believed that different species can coexist without violence. We propose a diplomatic meeting to resolve any misunderstandings. The response was immediate and filled with cruel laughter. Your weakness disgusts us, human. We do not negotiate with inferior species. Prepare to witness the power of the Zephyrian Empire. On the main screen, one of the alien ships broke formation and moved toward the Pioneer. It was a sleek, dark vessel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As it approached, the human ship's systems began detecting energy, readings that made no sense. "Captain," Pete called out, "they're charging some kind of weapon system. Power levels are off the charts." Lisa made the hardest decision of her life. "All hands prepare for combat. Amy, bring our weapons online. Ryan, make sure that data transmission is ready to go." The Pioneer was not a warship. It carried only basic defensive weapons and light armor plating. Against the massive alien cruiser bearing down on them, it stood about as much chance as a rowboat against a battleship. But Lisa Hayes had not become a starship captain by backing down from impossible odds. If this was humanity's first contact with an alien empire, she would make sure it was memorable. "This is Captain Hayes to the approaching vessel. Turn back now, or we will defend ourselves." The alien response was another burst of cold laughter, followed by weapons fire. The first blast struck the Pioneer's forward shields and nearly knocked everyone off their feet. Warning alarms screamed throughout the small ship as systems overloaded and failed. "Shields down to 30%. Amy shouted over the noise. "Return fire!" The Pioneer's small plasma cannons struck the alien cruiser with everything they had. The beams hit the enemy ship's hull and simply disappeared, absorbed by some kind of advanced shielding technology that humanity had never seen before. The second alien attack was even more devastating than the first. But this time, it wasn't just the ship that was hit. It was the crew's minds. Lisa felt a wave of terror and confusion wash over her as the neural disruptor beam struck. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what she was supposed to be doing. Around her, she could hear her crew members crying out in panic and fear. But somehow Lisa managed to fight through the mental fog. Maybe it was her training, or maybe it was pure stubborn determination, but she forced herself to think clearly. "Ryan," she gasped, "send that transmission now." Ryan's hands shook as he worked at his console, but he managed to hit the right buttons. The data package containing everything they had learned about the alien attackers shot out across space toward Earth and the other human colonies. The third attack destroyed the Pioneer completely. The small ship came apart under the alien weapons fire, its hull splitting open like a flower blooming in reverse. Lisa Hayes and her brave crew died instantly, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Across human space, communication centers received the transmission from the Pioneer. On Earth, Admiral Frank Carter sat in his office at Terran Defense Command, reading the reports with growing alarm. The data showed alien ships with technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. Their weapons were incredibly powerful. Their shields seemed almost impossible to penetrate, and worst of all, they had some kind of psychological weapon that could drive enemy crews insane with fear. But Admiral Carter was an old soldier who had spent his entire life studying warfare in all its forms. As he watched the sensor recordings from the Pioneer's final battle, he noticed something that others had missed. The aliens had overwhelming firepower, but they seemed to rely heavily on fear and intimidation. They expected their enemies to surrender quickly once they saw how hopeless resistance was. This suggested that they might not be as militarily superior as they appeared. They just hadn't faced an enemy that refused to give up. At the same time, on the remote research station Omega-7, Dr. Ellen Brooks and her team of scientists were analyzing the biological data that the Pioneer had managed to collect before its destruction. "Look at these neural patterns," Dr. Brooks told her assistant, Dr. Carl Mason. "The aliens have some kind of enhanced nervous system that makes them incredibly sensitive to certain frequencies. That's probably how their psychological weapons work so well." Dr. Mason studied the readouts carefully. "But Ellen, if they're that sensitive to neural frequencies, doesn't that also make them vulnerable? If we could figure out the right frequency to broadcast?" Dr. Brooks smiled grimly. "Exactly. Their greatest weapon might also be their greatest weakness. Meanwhile, War Commander Vextal watched the destruction of the human ship with satisfaction from the bridge of his flagship, Doombringer. The brief battle had confirmed what his intelligence reports suggested. Humans were a weak, technologically inferior species that would fall easily to Zephyrian might. "Prepare the fleet for full advance," he ordered his subordinates. "We will crush their colonies one by one until their pathetic government surrenders. This conquest will be even easier than Kalara." But as the Zephyrian fleet moved deeper into human space, they failed to notice the response their attack had triggered. Across dozens of human worlds, defense fleets were being assembled, weapons were being prepared, and plans were being made. Humanity had been caught off guard by the alien attack, but they would not be caught unprepared again. The death of Captain Lisa Hayes and her crew had sent a clear message to every human in the galaxy. The time for peace was over. The storm that Jake Morrison had warned about had finally arrived, and humanity was about to discover what they were truly capable of when pushed to the edge. Captain Danny Morrison stood in the command center of the battleship Defiance, watching the final preparations for humanity's first real test against the Zephyrian Empire. The massive ship hummed with energy around him, its experimental systems coming online one by one. Danny was Jake Morrison's younger brother, but where Jake had chosen the path of observation and diplomacy, Danny had always been drawn to action and combat. Now, with the alien fleet approaching the industrial world of New Berlin, he would finally get his chance to put human ingenuity against Zephyrian might. "Tactical report," Danny ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority that had made him one of Earth's youngest starship commanders. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, his tactical officer, looked up from her console with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Sir, we have 37 human ships in the defense fleet. Most are converted cargo haulers and mining vessels, but they're all armed and ready to fight," Chief Engineer Carlos Martinez called out from his station. "All experimental systems are green, Captain. The neural static generators are online, and the adaptive AI system is running perfectly." Danny nodded. The Defiance was humanity's answer to Zephyrian technological superiority. Instead of trying to match alien firepower directly, human engineers had focused on adaptability and unconventional tactics. The ship's computer system, nicknamed Atlas by the crew, could analyze enemy behavior patterns and suggest countermeasures faster than any organic mind. Marine Commander Kelly Stone stepped onto the bridge, her combat armor gleaming under the overhead lights. "My teams are ready for boarding action, sir. We've studied everything we could learn about Zephyrian ship layouts and crew behavior." Danny appreciated Kelly's confidence, but he knew they were still facing overwhelming odds. The approaching enemy fleet consisted of over 60 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the human defense force. "Incoming transmission from the enemy fleet," reported Communications Officer Ben Cooper. The main screen flickered to life, showing the cold reptilian features of War Commander Vextal. The Zephyrian leader looked even more intimidating in person than he had in the intelligence reports. "Humans of New Berlin," Vextal's voice echoed through the bridge. "You have seen what happened to your pathetic patrol ship. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we will make you suffer as no species has suffered before." Danny stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "This is Captain Danny Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. We've received your message, and here's our response. Come and take it." Vextal's eyes narrowed with anger. "Your arrogance will cost you dearly, human. Prepare to join your dead comrades, the Communication ended, and immediately the Zephyrian fleet began its attack formation. Danny watched as the alien ships moved with the same perfect coordination that had crushed 17 other worlds. "Sarah, initiate Battle Plan Alpha," Danny ordered. "All ships break formation and execute guerrilla protocol." What happened next surprised everyone, including the Zephyrians. Instead of forming the traditional battle lines that other species had used, the human fleet scattered in all directions like a flock of birds avoiding a predator. The converted cargo ships and mining vessels began using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. They hid behind asteroids, used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around enemy formations, and coordinated their attacks through tight beam communications that were almost impossible to intercept. Atlas is reading the enemy movement patterns, Carlos reported excitedly. The AI says their coordination depends on a central command structure. If we can disrupt their communications, do it, Danny ordered. The Defiance moved through space like a dancer, avoiding the massive plasma blasts from Zephyrian heavy cruisers while targeting specific systems on enemy ships. Instead of trying to destroy the alien vessels, human tactics focused on disabling their sensors, communications, and coordination systems. For the first time in their military history, the Zephyrians found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't behave the way enemies were supposed to behave. When they expected humans to retreat, the defenders attacked. When they tried to use their psychological weapons, humans seemed to become more determined rather than more frightened. "Sir," Sarah called out, "I'm detecting massive neural disruptor charges building on the enemy flagship. They're preparing to hit us with everything they've got." Danny smiled grimly. "Activate the neural static generators. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine." The Defiance had been equipped with modified human communication arrays that could broadcast chaotic neural patterns across multiple frequencies. When the Zephyrian disruptor beam struck, instead of paralyzing the human crew with fear, they found their own signals being reflected and amplified back at them. The effect on the Zephyrian fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly began drifting aimlessly as their crews experienced the same confusion and terror that they had inflicted on so many other species. War Commander Vextal stared at his command displays in shock. "This is impossible. How are they doing this?" His subordinates had no answers. For generations, Zephyrian military doctrine had been based on psychological superiority and technological dominance. They had never faced an enemy that could turn their own weapons against them. Meanwhile, on a converted mining ship called the Rock Crusher, Captain Tom Brady watched his improvised crew work with desperate efficiency. His weapons officer was a former asteroid miner. His engineer was a retired cargo pilot, and his communications specialist was a teenage colonist who had learned electronics by fixing farm equipment. "We've got a clear shot at that cruiser's engine section," reported his weapons officer, a grizzled veteran named Jack Stone. "Take it," Tom ordered. "Let's show these aliens what happens when you mess with human civilians." The Rock Crusher's mining lasers, designed for cutting through solid rock, sliced through the Zephyrian ship's hull like a hot knife through butter. The alien cruiser's engines exploded in a cascade of brilliant light. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human ingenuity met alien arrogance. Cargo ships used their loading cranes as improvised weapons. Mining vessels deployed clouds of metal-eating nanobots designed for asteroid processing, and converted passenger liners used their large cargo bays to launch swarms of maintenance drones that confused enemy targeting systems. But it was Kelly Stone and her Marines who delivered the most shocking blow to Zephyrian confidence. Using modified spacesuits and cutting tools borrowed from construction workers, her team managed to breach the hull of a Zephyrian command ship. What they found inside surprised everyone. The Zephyrians, despite their technological superiority, were completely unprepared for close-quarters combat. Their entire military doctrine was based on fighting at long range using overwhelming firepower and psychological weapons. "These aliens have never had to fight hand-to-hand," Kelly reported to Danny over her suit radio. "They don't know what to do when someone gets close enough to punch them." Kelly's Marines moved through the alien ship like wolves among sheep, using human weapons and tactics that the Zephyrians had never encountered. Within an hour, they had captured the vessel's bridge and taken its commander prisoner. War Commander Vextal watched in growing horror as his seemingly invincible fleet began to fall apart. Ships that had conquered worlds were being disabled by converted civilian vessels. Crews that had struck terror into the hearts of entire civilizations were panicking under the pressure of human determination. "All ships retreat to minimum safe distance," he finally ordered, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Regroup for tactical assessment." As the Zephyrian fleet pulled back, Danny allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had not only survived their first major battle against the galactic conquerors, they had actually won. "Status report," Danny called out. 17 enemy ships disabled or captured, Sarah reported with barely contained excitement. We lost 9 vessels, but most of their crews were rescued, Carlos added. The neural static generators worked better than we hoped. Several enemy ships are still drifting with confused crews. Danny looked at the retreating alien fleet and realized that something fundamental had changed. The Zephyrians were no longer the unstoppable force that had terrorized the galaxy. They had been fought to a standstill by a species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. But Danny also knew this was just the beginning. Vextal would not give up easily, and the Zephyrian Empire had resources that humanity could barely imagine. The real test was still to come. Atlas, Danny said to the ship's AI system, analyze the battle data and prepare recommendations for our next engagement. The computer's response was immediate. Analysis complete, Captain. Enemy forces show significant vulnerability to unpredictable tactics and psychological pressure. Recommend continued unconventional warfare strategies. Danny smiled. Humanity was learning to fight back, and they were just getting started. War Commander Vextal stood in the command center of his flagship, staring at tactical displays that showed something he had never seen before in his long military career. Defeat. The retreat from New Berlin had shaken him to his core, but it had also filled him with a cold, calculating rage. Summon the 3rd and 5th battle fleets, he ordered his communications officer. If the humans want a war, we will give them a war that will be remembered for 1,000 years. The massive Zephyrian armada that gathered at the edge of the Haven Point system 3 weeks later was the largest military force the galaxy had seen in centuries. Over 200 warships, including 5 of the Empire's dreaded siege platforms, hung in space like a storm cloud preparing to unleash destruction. Captain Danny Morrison watched the enemy fleet's arrival from the bridge of the Defiance, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Haven Point was humanity's most important strategic location, controlling the shipping lanes that connected Earth to its outer colonies. If it fell, human space would be cut in half. My God, whispered Sarah Kim, staring at the sensor readings. There are so many of them. Danny nodded grimly. How many ships do we have? 87 vessels, reported Carlos Martinez, but half of them are still converted civilian ships with minimal weapons. Danny looked around at his crew and saw the same determination that had carried them through the battle at New Berlin. Then we'll make those 87 ships count for more than 200 of theirs. The human defense fleet that assembled at Haven Point was unlike any military force in galactic history. Alongside proper warships like the Defiance were cargo haulers equipped with missile launchers, mining vessels loaded with improvised weapons, passenger liners converted into troop transports, and even a few luxury yachts whose wealthy owners had volunteered for combat duty. Commander Kelly Stone stood in the Defiance's Marine Bay, addressing a group of soldiers who came from every walk of human life. There were professional military personnel, but also farmers, factory workers, students, and retirees who had answered the call to defend their species. Listen up, Kelly said, her voice carrying to every corner of the crowded bay. The aliens think we're weak because we don't all look the same or think the same way. They're about to learn that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. On the research station orbiting Haven Point's 3rd moon, Dr. Ellen Brooks made the final adjustments to her most important creation. The neural frequency weapon that her team had developed was based on the biological data recovered from the destroyed Pioneer, and it represented humanity's best hope of turning Zephyrian strength into weakness. Are you sure this will work? Asked Dr. Carl Mason, watching Ellen prepare the transmission equipment. Ellen looked up from her work, her face showing the exhaustion of weeks spent in constant research. The Zephyrians enhanced their nervous systems to make their psychological weapons more effective, but that same enhancement makes them vulnerable to specific frequency patterns. If we can broadcast the right signal, we can turn their own minds against them, Carl finished. Meanwhile, Vextal prepared his forces for what he intended to be the final battle of the human war. His strategy was simple. Overwhelming force applied at the critical moment. The humans had surprised him once, with their unconventional tactics, but surprise only worked when your enemy wasn't ready for it. Deploy the siege platforms in standard formation, he ordered. Target the planet's population centers first. When the humans see their civilians dying, they will surrender to save what's left of their pathetic species. The battle began at dawn, Haven Point time. The Zephyrian fleet advanced in perfect formation, their massive ships blocking out the stars as they approached the human defense line. Danny Morrison studied the enemy approach on his tactical display, looking for weaknesses in what appeared to be an impenetrable wall of firepower. Sarah, what does Atlas recommend? The ship's AI had been analyzing Zephyrian tactics constantly since the last battle, learning from every engagement. Atlas suggests a modified version of the Thermopylae protocol, Sarah reported. Danny smiled. The Thermopylae protocol was named after an ancient Earth battle where a small force had held off a much larger army by using terrain to their advantage. In space, terrain meant using asteroids, moons, and gravity wells to level the playing field. All ships, execute Thermopylae, Danny ordered. Make them come to us. The human fleet scattered throughout the Haven Point system, taking positions behind asteroids in planetary rings and near the system's outer moons. Instead of meeting the Zephyrian advance head-on, they forced the enemy to split their forces, to chase scattered targets. What followed was less of a battle and more of a deadly game of hide-and-seek played out across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Human ships would emerge from hiding long enough to strike at enemy vessels, then disappear again before the Zephyrians could return effective fire. On the converted cargo ship New Horizon, Captain Lisa Chen directed her mixed crew of volunteers in a dangerous game of asteroid hopping. Her ship had been a grain hauler before the war, but now it carried enough missiles to sink a heavy cruiser. Zephyrian destroyer approaching from Sector 7, reported her sensor officer, a former restaurant manager named Mike Torres. Wait for it, Lisa said calmly. Let it get close. The enemy ship moved past their hiding spot, searching for human vessels. At the perfect moment, Lisa gave the order to fire. A spread of missiles erupted from the New Horizon's improvised launch tubes, striking the Zephyrian destroyer before it could react. Similar ambushes played out throughout the system as human crews used their intimate knowledge of local space to outmaneuver the more powerful enemy fleet. But Vextal was learning too, and he began to adapt his tactics to counter human guerrilla warfare. Enough of these games, he snarled. Deploy neural disruptors at maximum power. Blanket the entire system. The psychological weapon that had conquered 17 worlds began broadcasting its waves of terror and confusion across Haven Point. But this time, the humans were ready. Dr. Ellen Brooks activated her frequency weapon from the research station, sending carefully calibrated neural patterns directly at the Zephyrian fleet. The effect was immediate and devastating. Zephyrian crews, with their enhanced nervous systems, found themselves overwhelmed by their own psychological weapon turned against them. Ships began drifting as their crews experienced panic attacks and mental confusion far worse than anything they had ever inflicted on their enemies. What is happening? Vextal demanded, feeling his own mind beginning to cloud with unexplained fear. His tactical officer struggled to answer, his enhanced Zephyrian intellect now working against him. The humans, they're broadcasting something. I can't think clearly. But the battle was far from over. Even confused and disoriented, the Zephyrian fleet still had massive firepower advantages. Vextal fought through the mental fog and ordered his ships to continue their attack, even if they couldn't coordinate properly. This was when Kelly Stone made her move. Leading a strike force of marine transport ships, she targeted the enemy's command vessels for boarding actions. Her theory was simple. If Zephyrian crews were vulnerable to psychological pressure, they would be even more vulnerable to the terror of close-quarters combat. The Marines used modified construction suits and industrial cutting tools to breach enemy hulls, fighting their way through Zephyrian ships with a combination of human weapons and salvaged alien technology. What they found confirmed Kelly's suspicions. The Zephyrians, despite their technological superiority, had no experience with individual combat. Their entire military system was based on fleet actions and psychological warfare. When humans got close enough to fight hand-to-hand, the aliens simply didn't know how to respond. These guys have never been in a real fight, Kelly reported to Danny as her team captured another enemy bridge. They're like bullies who've never been punched back. The tide of battle turned when Danny led a concentrated assault on Vextal's flagship. The Defiance, supported by a dozen converted civilian ships, managed to penetrate the enemy formation and engage the massive command vessel at close range. What followed was the most brutal space combat in human history. The Defiance's experimental weapon systems, designed specifically to counter Zephyrian technology, tore into the alien flagship's defenses. At the same time, human boarding parties fought through the ship's corridors, capturing critical systems. Vextal found himself trapped on his own bridge, surrounded by humans who had proven that his supposedly invincible empire could be defeated. For the first time in his life, the proud war commander felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. "This is impossible," he whispered, watching his fleet fall apart around him. "We are the superior species. We have conquered worlds." Danny. Morrison stepped onto the enemy bridge, his weapon trained on the defeated Zephyrian commander. "You conquered worlds by making people afraid," he said calmly. "But fear only works when people have something to lose. We're fighting for our survival, and that makes us more dangerous than you ever imagined." As the remaining Zephyrian ships retreated in disorder, leaving behind dozens of disabled vessels and thousands of captured crew members, the galaxy received a message that changed everything. The seemingly news of the Zephyrian defeat at Haven Point spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On worlds that had cowered in fear of the alien empire for years, people gathered in public squares and listened to the impossible reports with growing amazement. The conquerors had been stopped. The humans had done what no other species thought possible. Captain Danny Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Defiance, watching the captured Zephyrian flagship Doombringer hanging motionless in space nearby. War Commander Vextal and his surviving crew were imprisoned aboard their own vessel, guarded by human marines who still couldn't quite believe they had defeated the galaxy's most feared military force. "Sir," called Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the bridge communication station, "we're receiving messages from 17 different species asking for military assistance against Zephyrian occupation forces." Danny nodded but didn't turn away from the window. The victory at Haven Point had been decisive, but it had also created a new problem. Everyone expected humanity to become the galaxy's new military superpower, to replace the Zephyrians as the dominant force in space. But that wasn't what humanity wanted. "Sarah, send a message to Earth. Tell Admiral Carter we need to have a serious discussion about our next steps." 3 days later, Admiral Frank Carter arrived aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony, accompanied by Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to ambassador after his detailed intelligence reports proved crucial to understanding Zephyrian tactics. Jake looked around at the debris field that marked humanity's greatest military victory, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. "Danny, you and your people have accomplished something amazing here, but what happens next?" Danny turned to face his older brother. "That's exactly what I've been thinking about. We could chase down the remaining Zephyrian fleets, capture their home worlds, maybe even build our own empire. But is that really what we want?" Admiral Carter stepped forward, his weathered face showing the strain of commanding humanity's defense during the darkest period in their history. "The Joint Chiefs have been debating this exact question. Some want to press our advantage, establish human dominance before the Zephyrians can regroup." "And the others?" Jake asked. "The others think we should focus on what we do best, bringing people together instead of tearing them apart." Their discussion was interrupted by a priority message from the Zephyrian flagship. Vextal was requesting a meeting with the human commanders. Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting. What do you suppose he wants?" Danny shrugged. Only one way to find out. An hour later, the 3 human leaders sat across from War Commander Vextal in the conference room of the Harmony. The proud Zephyrian looked different now, older, more tired, and definitely less arrogant than he had appeared in his propaganda broadcasts. Vextal studied his captors with intelligent eyes that showed a grudging respect. "You have surprised me, humans. In all my years of conquest, I have never encountered a species quite like yours." "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Danny asked dryly. Perhaps, Vextal replied. You fight differently than other species. Most enemies try to match our strength with their own strength. You used our strength against us. Admiral Carter leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Commander? Vextal was quiet for a long moment. My empire is vast, but it is also fragile. Our entire system is based on the belief that we cannot be defeated. Your victory has shattered that belief. Even now, rebellions are breaking out on conquered worlds. My own officers question my orders. Jake began to understand where this conversation was heading. You're facing a civil war. Worse than that, Vextal admitted. Complete collapse. The Zephyrian Empire was built on fear and intimidation. Without those tools, we have no idea how to govern. Danny sat back in his chair, considering the implications. So what are you asking us to do? Help you put down the rebellions? Vextal shook his head. I am asking you to teach us something we have never learned. How to coexist with other species instead of dominating them. The request caught all three humans off guard. They had expected demands for prisoner exchanges or negotiations about surrender terms. They had not expected the galaxy's most feared conqueror to ask for lessons in diplomacy. Admiral Carter exchanged glances with the Morrison brothers. This could be the opportunity we've been looking for. Over the following weeks, a remarkable series of negotiations took place in the neutral space around Haven Point. Representatives from dozens of species arrived to participate in what became known as the Haven Point Conference. Dr. Ellen Brooks presented her research on Zephyrian psychology and biology, showing how their enhanced nervous systems had made them incredibly effective at psychological warfare, but also vulnerable to the same techniques. Her findings suggested that Zephyrian aggression might be as much a product of their biology as their culture. We can help them modify their neural enhancements, she explained to the gathered delegates. Make them less sensitive to psychological manipulation while preserving their intellectual advantages. Commander Kelly Stone addressed the military aspects of the proposed agreement. The Zephyrians have advanced weapons and ship technology that could benefit all species if used for defense rather than conquest. In exchange, we can teach them tactical flexibility and the value of diverse perspectives in military planning. But it was Jake Morrison who addressed the most important question of all, whether different species with very different values and capabilities could actually learn to work together. The Zephyrians conquered worlds because they believed they were superior to everyone else, Jake told the conference. But superiority is not the same as strength. Real strength comes from recognizing what others can teach you and what you can offer in return. The Haven Point Accords that emerged from these negotiations created the framework for a new kind of galactic civilization. The Zephyrian Empire would maintain control of its core territories, but it would release all conquered worlds and allow them to choose their own governments. In exchange, humanity and other species would share technology and knowledge that could help the Zephyrians transition from conquerors to contributors. Most importantly, the Accords established the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, a military organization designed to prevent future wars of conquest. Command of the force would rotate between species, ensuring that no single group could use it for domination. Danny Morrison was chosen as the first human to command a joint species fleet, leading ships crewed by former enemies working toward common goals. Sarah Kim served as his tactical officer, using lessons learned from fighting the Zephyrians to help integrate their advanced technology with human adaptability. War Commander Vextal, reduced in rank but not in importance, became the first Zephyrian to serve as an advisor to the peacekeeping force. His knowledge of imperial tactics and psychology proved invaluable in preventing conflicts before they could escalate into wars. The transformation was not easy or immediate. Many Zephyrians struggled to abandon centuries of imperial thinking, while other species found it difficult to trust former conquerors. But gradually, as the benefits of cooperation became apparent, the new system began to work. On the former Zephyrian colony of Nexus Prime, Jake Morrison established the first interspecies embassy, a place where different civilizations could meet, trade, and resolve disputes without violence. The building itself was a symbol of the new galaxy, Zephyrian engineering supporting human architecture, with gardens designed by Kalari botanists and artwork contributed by dozens of different cultures. Kelly Stone founded the Galactic Marine Corps, an elite force trained in the art of peaceful intervention. Her Marines learned not just how to fight, but how to prevent fights from starting in the first place. Dr. Ellen Brooks opened the Institute for Interspecies Studies, where scientists from across the galaxy work together to understand the biological and psychological factors that led to conflict between different civilizations. As Jake stood in his office at the embassy, looking out at a plaza where humans, Zephyrians, Kalari, and dozens of other species mingled peacefully, he thought about how much had changed since that terrible day when he watched Kalara burn. The galaxy was far from perfect. There were still conflicts, still species that preferred isolation to cooperation, still individuals who dreamed of conquest and empire. But for the first time in galactic history, there was also hope that different kinds of beings could share the stars without destroying each other. A communication alert interrupted his thoughts. The message was from Danny, now commanding a joint patrol fleet in the Outer Rim territories. Jake, we just prevented a war between the Centauri Republic and the Vegan Trade Federation by getting them to actually talk to each other instead of shooting. Funny how often that works. How are things on your end? Jake smiled and activated his reply system. Busy as always. We have 3 new species applying for embassy status, and the Zephyrian Cultural Exchange Program is exceeding all expectations. Who would have thought that former conquerors could become such enthusiastic diplomats? As he prepared his weekly report for Earth, Jake reflected on humanity's unexpected role in galactic affairs. They had not become the new dominant power, as many had expected. Instead, they had become something more valuable, the species that helped others work